So Lou, how did you get connected with a Raleigh Kidder and the Jackson Center?
Well, it was more so Fran Galbato. Fran tried to encourage me on many occasions, and you know the kind of encouragement she expresses. And she said, Lou, you have to do this. I said, I don't know if I want to do it. Well, she kept on insisting. I said, okay, I'll come down. You can give me a tour. And basically, that's how it began. The best thing I've ever done in my retirement years.
So you were a teacher where?
At Washington Middle School.
Yep.
Prior to that, I had taught in Ohio for 5 years.
Okay.
I was there for 5 years. Becky my wife was familiar with this area. So we came up here in the 60s, 67, when I think that year they hired like 85 new teachers.
Okay.
And it was a big cycle then, which has occurred again 30-some years later. 40-some years later, I should say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been good. It's been good.
So you retired, and what did you teach?
I taught English.
Taught English. So Fran knows that you're now retired and you're fair game.
Fair game. I've worked with Fran for many years, and during the summers especially, with her and also Tom. And we became very good friends over the years. And it's been quite an experience. Of course, you know Fran.
I do know Fran, and I'm just, she clearly has written up quite a bit in the book by Kathy Evans as really the leader of the docent
Right.
concept and bookstores and a lot of other things that were there. And she was persistent and did things that we needed to have done. She just did it. I mean, stories are legion how that happened. So you walk in day one. Did Fran give you the tour? Did she?
She gave me the tour, a very extensive one. I enjoyed it immensely. She gave me all of her copies of her pieces of literature that she had, and I started reviewing it, studying it, becoming more interested every day. And you know, you think of an English background and you say, this is more like government or social studies. Well, I had a double major, but my concentration was in English. And she thought that it would be a good fit for me, and it was. And I've enjoyed it.
So when did you start? Give me a time.
You know, I was trying to think too, it's got to be at least, I would say, you know, the Jackson Center was in existence 3 or 4 years, so it had to be 15, 16 years ago that I got involved.
So who was involved? Also the docents at that time. It was Ann Cole, one of them?
Ann Cole, she came later.
Okay. Was Carolyn Volk? Remember Carolyn?
Oh yes, I remember her now, yes.
Okay.
She was there. Gloria Lasser was there at that time. Yeah. I think I'm the last of that era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So during that time, you've had an opportunity to not only study Jackson. What did you learn about him that you kind of excited you with your certainly your background in English? You read books and listened to a lot of people say. What's kind of the walk away?
Yeah. You know, what's interesting, I think, is that I really didn't have an idea of who Jackson was. Like most people, you know, I think you brought that to the surface. But I recall, you know, in some of my studies of course, the Third Reich in Germany and the Nuremberg trials, but I never connected until, you know, I got to the Jackson Center, just how significant that was. So. Yeah.
Did you read some of Jackson's speeches and opinions and that stuff?
I have a great deal of it. Yes.
I always recall you were just so studious. You always had a book. You always had that station, if you will. And I suspect you had a chance, because you were so active, to meet some of the program participants. Do you remember some of the individuals who kind of caught your attention?
The person that most impressed me was Gabriel Bach. And it just happened by accident. We had him there for a reception, maybe 7, 8 years ago now. And we had the opportunity, my wife and I, to sit at his table. And we had quite a conversation. And I was very impressed with him. So I did my research. Yeah, I investigated him. And interestingly, he commented during the evening, he commented on the girl in the red coat. Are you familiar with that one?
Tell the story.
Well, the girl in the red coat, he was one of 3 prosecutors at the Eichmann trial. And during his interviewing of various individuals who had been in the concentration camps, one person that he did comment on was this gentleman who said that he had lost his entire family at Auschwitz, and that the person commented on the fact that when his family, he was to the right selection, they were all to the left, and his entire family walking right to the gas chambers. And the last memory that this person had of his family was seeing his daughter, his very young daughter, 5 or 6 years old, on her way to the chambers in this red coat. And he commented to my wife and me, I don't know, how it even transpired, but he said that when he was interviewing Eichmann, this thought came to him, and he was reflecting on what this person had told him. And during the trial itself, he paused. He couldn't say a word. Here he is questioning Eichmann. That thought comes to him, and there was nothing he could do for about a minute or two. And when I heard him say all this, I said, I wonder how much of this is, truly true. When I saw the movie Schindler's List and saw that red coat, then I did a little more research. And I located a film, a documentary, I think it was on CNN several years ago. And I identified that. And here is Bach as a young man back in 1961 questioning Eichmann. And then he just hesitates. He just stands right there at the podium for at least 1 or 2 minutes, not saying a word. And Bach said to my wife and me, he says, that's when I thought of that little girl in the red coat. It's one heck of a story. Yeah, it was impressive.
Yeah.
And I've always, I thought he was a gentleman.
Yeah. Did you met his wife too?
I met his wife, right. They were both interesting people. Now, I don't know, is he still living?
Both are.
He's got to be in his late 90s, I would think.
And we've been in some contact. But yeah, that was a coup to get him here for a week.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
What a gentleman. Yeah.
Do you remember other folks that drew your attention? Because you were there.
I've seen them all. Yeah, I liked Phil Donahue. In fact, I had a conversation with him. I was very fortunate again. After one of the evenings that he was, where were we, at Mayville at the
Yeah.
hotel. And during his comments, he mentioned that he was a young reporter then, working for, I forget for whom, but he said that one of his particular responsibilities was to follow the John F. Kennedy campaign during those years, 1959 that would have been. And I had related to him that Robert Kennedy came to our college. I went to a very small liberal arts school in West Virginia, and he came to our college, and I'll never forget that morning. Now here is a Seventh-day Adventist college, mostly comprised of Roman Catholic students because we were all commuters. And he came in that morning. I was on the board of students who, we had to go to, if you can believe this, we had to go to chapel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They closed the entire college on those 3 days from noon to 1. And we had to attend these various services, regardless of whether you were Catholic or whatever. You had to be there. They took attendance. It was funny. It was really funny. And I remember that on Fridays, the student body would make the selection as to who would be there. And we, of course, everything had to be done in advance, and we had to, you know, get these personalities. Well, Robert Kennedy and he came in on a bus, and all of his people came with him. Robert Kennedy spoke at the college on a Friday morning, Friday afternoon. And I can just picture it so well. He came onto the stage, sleeves rolled up, disheveled, his hair was all over the place, his clothes were wrinkled, and he spoke for an hour. And that, you know, of course, West Virginia was a crucial state for John F. Kennedy during those, during that time, because it was considered a Bible-toting state, and how would a Roman Catholic fit in? Well, he was well accepted. Robert Kennedy was well accepted. And then about 2 days later, John F. Kennedy came into our hometown. And that was an interesting experience. I was with my father, who was a very strong Democrat, union official. And John F. Kennedy came to a hotel, the Stonewall Jackson Hotel. Stonewall Jackson was a native of my hometown. Big statue sitting in the county court square, and I'm wondering if it's still there. But anyway.
And what is your hometown?
Clarksburg.
Okay.
Yeah, nice town, about the size of Jamestown, 30,000. Anyway, John F. Kennedy, he was speaking to businessmen that evening, and my father got an invitation, and he brought me along. And here's Kennedy, all dressed, wonderfully dressed, addressing all of these businessmen in the community. Well, the next morning, he spoke at a union hall, at my father's union hall. So I was able to get access to that. Now you see John F. Kennedy in a totally different image. Sleeves rolled up, jacket gone. He knew his audience. Yeah.
What a thrill.
Yeah, that was a thrill. Yeah.
And Donahue was covering, that time period.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I spoke to him about it. He says, yeah, he says, I can't recall that. He says, but I do recall going to other places with the Kennedy caravan. But it was interesting. Yeah, I liked that.
Were you at the center when Rehnquist came?
I wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was right before right after he left, then I came. Yeah.
So you've seen other folks, you talk about that, Whitney Harris, Henry King in that group?
Oh yes. Well, I recall. I'm sure you recall. I can't remember his name though. But the very first interview that I experienced with you was with the law professor, or maybe he was the head of the law school at University of Chicago. What's his name?
Jeffrey Stone.
Jeffrey Stone. I sat in on that interview. I don't know how many years ago that was. That was early because,
2007,
yeah. So I had, maybe that's when I came, 2007. But I was impressed with the interview. Interesting gentleman. Yeah, that was my first experience.
He was our first Robert Jackson lecturer. And that night we had one of our first Jackson Society dinners there. What I really remember is so hot. And as you recall, we didn't have air conditioning.
No, I remember. And it was in the auditorium.
Yeah, it was just
hot.
We couldn't find any way to get any breeze anywhere, anyhow. We started the auditorium, then we went down to the basement thinking somehow it was cooler in the basement, and everybody was just sweating profusely. And
then he came back, huh?
Yeah, it was just crazy. Some of the other guys you remember, so we talked about Donahue, we've certainly had...
Of course, Mark Russell.
Mark Russell.
Interesting. I've seen Ferenz.
Red Friends, yeah.
Remember him? Whitney Harris, I thought was. What a student of language he was.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe his age and being able to address the public the way he did for an hour without any notes. He was quite the man.
And he looked right out of Central Casting, white hair.
Yes, just
Real.
very handsome. Yep.
Yeah.
And his wife, I remember his wife. Yes. Yeah.
Those were interesting times. So you had a chance at the time and Raleigh was still there.
Raleigh was there. Yeah.
And what did they have you do as docents during that time period? Of course, giving tours.
Gave tours.
And did they give you packets of information?
Yeah, well, you know, at the time, when Carol was there, if she found we weren't too busy, we docents, she would always have something for us to do. Yeah. So I examined some of the documents just to check them out, see what what my impressions were.
Mm-hmm.
Carol always kept us busy. Yeah. Which was good.
Which is good. Did you get involved in, Whitney Harris wrote a couple of books. Did you get involved in any proofreading of any of those books?
I don't think I proofed any of his.
Okay.
I know I proofed, what's her name? Now Evans, Bill Evans' wife.
Yeah, this book, Kathy Evans' book.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I proofed some of that.
Mm-hmm.
She had me look over some things. But yeah, it was a good experience too.
Well, you're mentioned in here, the book.
I recall that.
Maybe you put your name in while you're proofreading it. That's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
And it said, then Galbato began to solicit the help of friends, including Jim Oria, Lou Mazzie, Ann Cole, and Steve Massa. And so that was the volunteers, and then there was a whole section on things you had to learn from the Kent, the Grant Room story.
Right.
A lot of stuff went on there. Do you remember any specific groups? Because sometimes you never knew. I mean, you could go in and nothing could happen. You're reading a book or doing a crossword puzzle, whatever you want to do. But next thing you know, a bus rolls in and you really got to step up your game. Do you remember any unusual groups that sort of rolled in and taxed your sense of humor?
A group of students from Maple Grove.
Okay.
Inquisitive. Now, there was, I hate to say it, but there was quite a bit of difference in, let's say, students from Jamestown and students from Maple Grove. They just seemed to be more receptive to everything you said, they being Maple Grove. Although all the students that I ever had to go through with, with a tour were always gentlemanly, well-mannered. I'm sure those teachers said, on your best behavior. Yeah.
So you probably sat in on some of those when we had young readers, the Jerry Spinellis, the Lois Lowrys, the
Right.
Jane Yolans.
Right.
Did you get a chance to interface with them at all, the authors of that time period?
Well, I did interface with one, so Jackie Robinson's.
Sharon Robinson.
Right. And the reason that happened was that my grandson, my oldest grandson, Maria's son, wrote an essay and was a winner of the contest, of that grade level.
Yeah.
And so, I met her, and she was interesting. You never know who you were going to meet. You just didn't know. And I was thinking of a gentleman this morning. He gave me his business card, and I believe his name was Binnert, Binnert. Came in with a daughter, maybe, elderly gentleman, and he had a drama school in New York City, but he had a connection with concentration camps as a child, just a young child. And I don't know what I did with the card. In fact, I looked for it this morning, but I'm pretty sure his last name was Binnert.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting experience with him. And he was very receptive to talk about his experiences in Europe as well as in America. Supposedly a big time producer and writer. His last name, I'm pretty certain it was Binnert. I'm going to look it up and see. But interesting. And I had an interesting experience with a couple. He was from Buffalo, the University of Buffalo, and he was in their graphic arts department. He headed the department, and he was now retired. And I was showing him through the various photographs that we have of Diodario, in the auditorium. We were commenting on them. And he and his wife both stopped at this one photo. And if you'll recall, the photo shows all of the defendants, and then behind them were the military police standing guard. And he and his wife just stood there for a while and looked at it. And I asked him, I said, well, you must find this interesting, this piece of photograph here. He says, yes. He says, I was commissioned to do an artwork. And I said, well, what was it? He says, well, I had the 7 defendants, or the 15 or how many defendants that were there seated. And behind them, I removed, in this photograph that he did, he says, I removed all of the military police officers and placed their family members who had perished at various concentration camps. He was commissioned to do that by a family in Buffalo, but it wasn't his family members. But that's how they wanted that for their surviving relatives and those who had died to be placed behind those defendants.
That's chilling.
Yes, and I said, you think we can get maybe a copy of that? He said, well, I'll see what I can do. But it never happened. And I should have taken his name, but I forgot.
That's incredible.
Yeah, things like that just would come up. They come up, Greg, and you just, as you say, serendipitously, I'll get it. It's there. And you take advantage of it.
That is the real point. You never know. You just got to be in the game. The antenna's up.
Yeah.
This is your interview, not mine. But one quick story. Everybody had left, and I got a call around 4 o'clock to lock up. Hey, somebody had to leave early. Okay, I had the keys. So I went over there. I'm walking around, shutting doors. And around 5 o'clock, there was a knock on the door off of Prendergast Avenue. And a guy just, in a shirt, which looked like he'd been out raking leaves, kind of somewhat disheveled. And he just wanted to know, are you open? And I said, kind of, sort of, but we're kind of locking up for tomorrow. That's okay. I go, hi, I'm Greg Peterson. He goes, hi, I'm Paul Sarbanes. And I go, like, Senator Paul Sarbanes from Maryland? Yes. Like, we're open. We're wide open. Come on in. Come on in. So I gave him a quick tour, and with the agreement that he would come back the next day with his friend. And so he did. I said, I want to interview you because you're on the Senate Judiciary Committee. You're the guy leading senator to decide who is going to move ahead to be a justice of the Supreme Court. Kind of what's Jackson mean to you? I think he was very articulate. So I interviewed him. But he brought a guy named Clint Bamberger. Clint Bamberger, you might never know him, but he was just sitting when I was interviewing Sarbanes like this. And he goes, my buddy Clint's a pretty interesting guy too. He's just sort of deflecting it. And I go, why? Why would I want to interview this guy? Tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Well, he was the general counsel that started the Peace Corps with Sergeant Shriver.
No kidding.
I said, you're done. So we did an interview with Clint Bamberger. Again, names that are household names, but they were there. He was best friends with the Kennedys, and that all happened because a guy knocked on the door at 5 o'clock, serendipity.
Yeah.
And you never know.
You never know. Who was the congressman from West Virginia? The old guy.
Oh, Ken Hackler.
Hackler. I've read some of his book too. But he was in your office, or I should say in the exec's office at the center, just sitting there one evening. We were having a reception or something. I introduced myself, and I told him I was from West Virginia, and I said, do you recall Cleveland Bailey? And he said, well, that SOB. Just like that. Because he was a former congressman as well. And it triggered such a thought in my mind. My father and I were downtown in Clarksburg. And across the street was Cleveland Bailey walking down the street, right in Main Street downtown, like here. And my father said, look at that son of a... Just, you hear this gentleman saying it, and then I'm reflecting on my father having said the same thing. I said, you don't like him, Dad? He says, I hate him. And he walked across the street, shook his hand, like they were good friends or something. But
wow, that's a great memory.
Yeah, you never know. But it's an interesting experience as well.
At the time, Ken Hackler had agreed at age 94 or 5 to run for the primary of the United States Senate.
Really? I didn't know that.
Senator Byrd had died, and there was a special election. Mm-hmm. So while he was here, had agreed to do that. And so he handed me a piece of paper and his driver's license. And I go, Congressman Hackler, what's this about? He goes, well, here, I'm going to sign in front of you my petition that I have to file today in the Secretary of State's office to run for United States Senate. I'm going to sign in front of you. You will notarize my signature, and you need to know that I am, in fact, Ken Hackler. That's the driver's license. I go, well, yeah, okay. The next thing you know, I get my stamp, and I'm notarizing it in New York for his filing next day. And of course, that became a cause celeb.
Can imagine.
Automatically sent it, and it was emailed in, and my name is now affixed to the official petition. And then half the next day was all he was on his cell phone, again at 94 or 5,
Yeah.
explaining why he was running for the U.S. Senate. And he got like 20 or 30%.
Yeah.
He had one issue, it was mountaintop, mining.
Mining, oh God, yeah, that's been an issue down there for 70 years at least.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great memory.
yeah, that was. Yeah. I know my cousin, who lives in Charleston, is friendly with the elderly congressman.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he passed, didn't he?
He just
A
passed.
couple years ago,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah.
But he got married.
I heard
First
that.
time.
Yeah, my cousin told me that. He said, "Would you believe he got married?" Yeah, in his 90s.
Yeah, he was such a delight. He
Yeah.
did so much. My gosh, Truman, Nuremberg, Remagen, Congressman, Martin Luther King, you name it. It just
He was there. Yeah. Yeah.
it's unbelievable. So what's your you're sitting here now, 2020. You're still one of on the active list of docents, and longer than anybody, continuing to serve. What's your sense of the center? Did you get you survived a lot of years, and what's your sense?
Well, I have to admit that I'm very pleased with what has transpired over the years. To see all of the advancement that has occurred in various aspects, especially education. I think we really have to concentrate on young people because they will soon be adults, and if they can keep themselves familiar with the Jackson Center and government, I think that's a real plus for the community. I like everything that's been done. Restorations, additions. It's been a good effort by everybody.
Well, in the middle of the mix is a guy named Lou Mazzie, and we really appreciate that. That's great.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure for me. It's, you never know. You just never know who you're going to come in contact with. And I like to keep it low-keyed. I mean, I like to stay in the background and just observe. It's fun to watch. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll roll out some of those memories on December 14th. So
That'll be
stay
good.
tuned.